Good morning, everybody. I'm Don Stewart, and welcome to another edition of Breaking News. Today is Wednesday, the second day of July, 2025. And in the headlines, a new hostage ceasefire deal? Well, it looks like the same old, same old. So let's look at the headlines and see what's going on. First of all, Donald Trump claims Israel agreed to conditions for a 60-day Gaza ceasefire. This is from the Jerusalem Post. And then we have Hamas, their response. They officially double down on their demands for the end of the war amidst the new hostage deal hopes. In other words, no, we have more demands beyond what was given to us. That's from the Jerusalem Post. And then an excellent article by YNET that kind of puts it all into perspective. Why is it taking so long to defeat Hamas? All right, we're going to look at those three stories this morning because they're the big news that's coming across the wire. All right, headline number one. Trump claims Israel agreed to conditions for 60-day ceasefire. This is from the Jerusalem Post. U.S. President Donald Trump claimed that Israel has agreed to the necessary conditions to finalize the 60-day ceasefire, during which time we will work with all parties to end the war, in a post on Truth Social last night, Tuesday night. In the post, Trump confirmed that his representatives had a long and productive meeting with the Israelis today on Gaza. The Qataris and Egyptians have worked very hard to help bring peace. We'll deliver this final proposal, he added. I hope for the good of the Middle East that Hamas takes the deal because it will not get better. And then all uppercase letters, it will only get worse, he continued. Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer informed the U.S. envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, that Israel has accepted the proposal for a ceasefire and hostage deal and is ready to begin close talks with Hamas to finalize the agreement, senior officials said on Wednesday. Earlier on Tuesday, Trump had told reporters that he expects to have a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas by next week when Prime Minister Netanyahu visits Israel. Qatar submitted a mediation proposal, in other words, mediated between the two, but to both Hamas and Israel based on the Witkoff framework, I guess, and they made minor adjustments and additions, but it's more or less the same thing, it seems. This is according to a source familiar with the details that spoke to the Jerusalem Post earlier on Tuesday. All right, so here's where we're at with this at that time. Trump said, we're going to get a deal. I'm putting pressure on Netanyahu. He's got to make a deal immediately. I'm going to be very hard on him, is what Trump said, very, very firm. A deal has to be made. He made that publicly, and then they submitted the deal to Hamas. Well, what do you expect? Hamas, just like the sun rises in the east, is going to double down and demand more because they feel Israel's vulnerable right now. And this is our next story. Just came across the wire a little while ago. Hamas official doubles down on demands for end of the war amidst new hostage deal hopes. Also from the Jerusalem Post. Hamas official Taher al-Nunu said that Hamas was ready and serious regarding reaching an agreement, but the officials have doubled down on demands that a new hostage deal agreement would see a complete end to the war. In other words, not just a ceasefire, but a complete end of the war. The Associated Press today reported on Wednesday, citing an official from the terror group. Al-Nunu said Hamas was ready and serious regarding an agreement. He said, but it has to be an initiative has to be there that clearly leads to a complete end of the war. In other words, we're not looking for just a temporary ceasefire. We want an agreement that has a complete end to the war. A delegation from Hamas is expected to meet the mediators in Cairo today, Wednesday, an official Egyptian told AP. Negotiations continued based on an altered version of U.S. Steve Witkoff's framework that would see the remaining 50 hostages, less than half of whom are still alive, released after being held for over 600 days in captivity. All right, so what we heard was only 10 of the 20 that are going to be released. Who knows exactly what's in the deal? But the bottom line is Hamas says no, unless there's a definite conclusion to the war. We're not going to make a deal. No ceasefire, no 60-day ceasefire. We need an end to the war. All right. So in other words, no deal unless Trump somehow forces Netanyahu to capitulate, which is very, very doubtful. So that's the latest. All this excitement about a possible deal, and then Hamas says, no, no, no ceasefire, end of the war. That's the one thing we'll do. So here's the big question. Why is it taking so long to beat Hamas? Now, there's an excellent summary of this in YNET. We're going to go over it for you because what it does is it lists 7 different problems why it's taking so long. We're going to look at this 21-month-long war with the terrorist organization. When could bring home the 50 remaining hostages, most of whom are deceased? What's taking so long? All right, here's the story. Complicating matters is the fact that Hamas remains in power in the Gaza Strip. This means at least two of the war's central objectives, eradicating Hamas militarily and politically, remains unmet. A larger question looms. If Israel was able to accomplish its objectives in battles against Hezbollah and Iran swiftly, then what went wrong with Gaza? What has gone wrong here? According to experts, several factors are in play. And here are 7 key differences between the war in Gaza and other conflicts Israel has fought in recent months and years. Problem number 1, more than just military goals. One of the stated aims of the war in Gaza is the destruction of both the military and civilian wings of Hamas. This stands in contrast to Israel's more narrowly defined objectives in its recent campaigns against Hezbollah and Iran. According to Adi Schwartz of the Miskov Institute, the goal is much wider than those in Lebanon or Iran, focused solely on military targets. In Gaza, Israel has set out to dismantle an entire governing infrastructure, military and political alike. To a degree, Israel has succeeded in weakening Hamas and pushing back its terrorist operations, similar to what it achieved with Hezbollah and Iran's nuclear capabilities. However, unlike in those cases, Hamas remains in control of the population in the Strip, and that's something that has to be dealt with. Number 2, second problem, October 7th changed everything. Since October 7th, 2023, Israelis have better understood the actual threat posed by Hamas. On that day, more than 6,000 residents of the Gaza Strip, slightly more than half of them Hamas terrorists, breached the Israeli border, murdered 1,200 people, and kidnapped 251 others. Thousands of more were injured. Unlike in Israel's other recent battles, the attack on October 7th made this war deeply personal and existential. It's an all-out war, Schwartz said. This is not simply about revenge. Israelis, especially those living in the South, cannot resume their lives with any sense of security until they're convinced that Hamas cannot regroup and launch another attack. So the weight of October 7th still hangs heavily upon the national psyche. That's problem number 2. Problem number 3, of course, the hostage dilemma. From day one, Israel has had to operate under significant constraints due to the hostages being held in Gaza. There were certain neighborhoods and certain cities that Israel was very careful not to attack and not to bomb because the IDF believed the hostages were being held there, Schwartz said. If you and I know that, obviously Hamas also knew it, meaning they could cling on to those hostages and have those areas where they could continue fighting. Schwartz referred to the hostages as a kind of a security blanket for the terrorist organization. Still, Avivi said that if a temporary ceasefire could bring home as many hostages as possible, Israel should still take the opportunity, even if it prolongs the military mission against Hamas, so long as that goal is preserved. The idea would be that the army stays in position, we don't retreat, Avivi explained. We have a ceasefire and then continue. If we retreat and they regroup in the areas we already conquered, that is a problem. Of course, the problem is now is with this response of Hamas, they don't want a ceasefire. They want a complete end of the war. So this point is moot. And then number 4, fourth problem, tunnels. Fighting Hamas is fundamentally different from conducting airstrikes on Iran or even launching a ground invasion against Hezbollah. One primary reason is Hamas's elaborate and extensive tunnel system. The group has constructed more than 200 miles of underground tunnels, some say 500 miles, many reinforced with concrete and iron, creating a hidden battlefield that has significantly complicated Israel's operations. Avivi explained that these tunnels have been used for multiple purposes. They hide hostages, they store hundreds of rockets, RPGs, and explosive devices, and of course, they provide cover for Hamas's fighters. The tunnels have also neutralized many of Israel's military battlefield advantages, such as superior intelligence gathering, precision airstrikes, and advanced armored combat units. The enemy has literally gone underground, making it harder to target and defeat. Problem number 5, no state, no rules. Another challenge in Gaza is the absence of any legitimate partner. In Lebanon, while about a third of the population is Shiite in support of Hezbollah, another third is Christian, and another third is Sunni Muslim. This diversity allows for some level of internal political balancing. There is a government in Lebanon that tries, Schwartz said. We don't yet know whether or not they're going to be successful, but at least you have someone to work with inside Lebanon to try to curb Hezbollah's operations. In contrast, Gaza offers no such opportunity. In the Gaza Strip, you have almost 100% of the population pro-Hamas, or at least shares their ideology, Schwartz explained. Moreover, unlike Lebanon or Iran, Israel's not fighting a state. It's fighting a coastal enclave ruled by a terrorist entity that does not abide by the rules of war. It's a really important point. There's a great difference between a war against a state and a war against a terror organization, said Harel Shoreb, a senior researcher at the Moshe Dayan Center. From the very beginning, people were mistaken to compare the 1973 Yom Kippur War or the Six-Day War with the war in Gaza. This is not a conventional war with tanks against tanks or infantry against infantry. And then problem number 6, and this is another huge one, double standards. Schwartz argued that Israel has been held to a different standard than other nations in its war against the Palestinians in Gaza, forced to provide food, water, and electricity to an area controlled by a terrorist organization, thereby inadvertently sustaining Hamas. Israel, other than any country in the world, has been required to supply the enemy. Israel is under tremendous pressure to provide aid and prolong the war, putting a siege on an area is a classic and legitimate tool of war. I've never heard of any army or country that's trying to win a war and at the same time providing supplies to the enemy. And of course, international pressure is forcing them to do this. And finally, number 7, a war on multiple fronts. From the outset, Israel was pulled in multiple directions. Either the American administration imposed heavy constraints on the military, or it was required to divert resources to fight other enemies, such as Hezbollah in Lebanon, of course, Iran, and the Houthis in Yemen. From the first rocket launch by Hezbollah on October 8th, the army had to deploy large numbers of soldiers to the northern border and ultimately engage in combat in Lebanon. Soon after the fall of the Assad regime, instability on the Syrian border, requiring additional forces, and then came threats from the Houthis in Iran, drawing further attention and resources. For the first time in this war, the full center of gravity is going to Gaza. First, finally now. I think the fact that the IDF managed to neutralize the axis, that is Hezbollah, Syria, Iran, Iraq, and the Houthis, they're all very weak and focused on Gaza now. In this new reality, he said, we will be able to achieve the mission. There's nothing we cannot do once we put our minds to it. The experts agree winning is the only option. However, what we have is Donald Trump saying you've got to end the war right now, right now. And herein lies the problem. So, basically, any scenario they conclude that leaves Hamas in the Gaza Strip is a disaster. The message would be devastating that you can be radical, Muslim Brotherhood, jihadist terror organizations, even a small and weak one, and wage war against one of the strongest actors in the Middle East and survive. We can't let that happen, and no, they can't. So this is the 7 reasons why this hasn't been easy. But the fact they can concentrate on Gaza now should allow them to finish it soon. Yet President Trump is pushing for an immediate ceasefire, and Hamas said yes, as long as not just a ceasefire, it's the end of the war. What's going to happen? Well, we'll let you know later when we know more about this. I'm Don Stewart. Thanks for watching. Until next time, as always, may the Lord richly, richly bless.